The ACLU has always been a very contentious, disputatious organization, as one would expect for a group of civil libertarians. When I was elected president, and it was a very contested election, the New York Times did one of those person in the news profiles, and the pull quote they had under my photograph was a somewhat corny but completely true line when I had said in my speech to the National Board of Directors, which had elected me, I want to emphasize the American in American Civil Liberties Union. And my husband, who had been to many of these ACLU National Board debates with all of the arguing and screaming and points of order and points of procedure and, never a unanimous vote, always very, very fractured, he looked at that quote and he said, I wish you would emphasize the civil in American Civil Liberties Union.
Yeah.
But I love those debates because, in retrospect, given how hard it has become to debate issues where people feel strongly because of the sensitivity and the concern about being accused of being some kind of an ist or some kind of an obe, we didn't have those constraints. We shared basic commitments. We felt very strongly about them. And maybe to the outside world, our differences might seem like debating angels on the head of a pin. But the more strongly you care about something, the more seriously you take even seemingly minute differences. But we made decisions and we got along very well as individuals despite our disagreements. Now, substantively, I would say the single greatest source of pride and interest to me looking back was the advent of the internet, which burst upon the public and political and press radar screen in the early 90s. Obviously, scientists had known about it before, but it didn't become well known to the public until the early 90s, at which point it was greeted the way all new media are throughout history, with suspicion and fear, and let's censor that because it's so much dangerous information and misinformation can get out there to children and other vulnerable people. And the way Congress greeted it was to sweep through a law called the Communications Decency Act. Almost nobody voted against it on either side of the aisle. It was supported by the Clinton administration. The ACLU challenged that law, and thank goodness for the United States Supreme Court, 9-0,
Really?
struck down the law under the First Amendment. The internet, in a
Unbelievable.
landmark case, the first.
I've forgotten that.
I was very involved in the
I was
litigation.
working on banking work at that point. Wow.
We would have lived in a completely different world, Doug, if that law had been upheld. So first of all, I'm very proud that the Supreme Court's first decision about the Constitution in cyberspace has gone down in history as Janet Reno was Bill Clinton's Attorney General versus ACLU.
Right,
and the Communications Decency Act would have outlawed any online expression that was, these were the terms in the law, indecent or patently offensive. Now, just think how subjective those terms are. The list of who our clients were is a list of what speech would have been suppressed, including the ACLU itself, because a lot of our material.
80% of speech today would be suppressed.
Exactly. I mean, we also represented mainstream booksellers associations and publishers and magazines and periodicals, but human rights organizations and LGBTQ rights publications. It would have been dumbed down to the way broadcast television is now. And I find it's hard for my students to understand this because they don't understand that how something is transmitted is relevant to what speech is protected. And to this day...
They also have nothing to compare it to from their own experience.
Yeah. But, so the patently offensive and indecent ban does apply to over-the-air broadcast radio and television. And to this day, when I do interviews on those media, I can't cite and quote one of the Supreme Court's most important First Amendment decisions, which also came out of the Vietnam era, upholding the right of a college student to wear a jacket saying, "Fuck the draft." The F word would not only get me bleeped, but would get the station in trouble, in danger of being fined or even losing its broadcast license. And that would have happened to the internet.